Hi, this is Mike at Fancyfoam Models. Today I'm putting together a wing for the Rans S7 Courier. What I'm going to do is explain a little bit on how to cut the spar slots and glue the spars in place. And I'm going to do a little something extra in that I'm going to add some dihedral to the center of the wing and show how that can be easily done. The parts that I've got today, I've got the right and left wing half. The wings as they come in the kit have the hinge line already hot wire cut into them. You've got the flap and the aileron. On the bottom side you have the aileron pocket cut out, the flap pocket cut out, and then a little pocket for the connector for the servo extension for the aileron servo. I've got my foam tack glue. I prefer foam tack. We used welders in the past, but the foam tack seems to last a little bit longer. It doesn't get brittle as fast, and it doesn't yellow over time in the sun like the welders did. I've got a straight edge. In this case I've got a 4-foot straight edge. You can do it with a 2-foot straight edge, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then I've got the two carbon fiber rods, 1.5 millimeter by 1,000 millimeters long, that are going to be used for the spars. The first thing I'm going to do, last thing, I've got a roll of tape here. This is going to be just a spacer. It's 3/4 inch thick tape. You could use 1 inch, you could use anything. All I'm going to use this for is a spacer to lift the wingtip when I put the dihedral in. So I've built the wing flat and it flies good flat. I want to try it with a little bit of dihedral in it. That should add a little bit more stability to the airplane. But I don't want to add too much because I do like to do the rolls and mild aerobatics with it. So we'll go ahead and proceed. The first thing we're going to do is apply some foam tack glue to the root edge of both of the wings. When you start out, you can just kind of check the alignment, make sure everything fits good, make sure you know what it looks like when it's going to be finished as far as alignment and everything. On the glue I'm going to apply a decent amount. When we're doing hinges we don't add much glue, but for doing glue and wing panels together you can add a little bit more glue. So I'm going to add a bead on both sides. Kind of a bead on top and a bead on bottom. And then I'm going to take the two halves and just place them together and move them front to back and top to bottom around in a circle, and just try to smear that glue around, get a nice even coat. With the foam tack, if you haven't used it before, it is a contact adhesive. You probably can't tell in the camera, but as I pull this apart, it's starting to make little strings. There you can see it as it dries out. So I'm going to let that sit for a little bit and get tacked up, and then we'll push it together, and then we'll let it sit for about 10 minutes till it's fully cured, because as I'm doing the spars I don't want to pull that back apart. But while it's curing I'll be able to do some other stuff as far as spar slots. For right now I do want to go ahead and talk about the spar slots. On each wingtip, it's kind of faint in there, but there's 2 3/4 inches back from the leading edge. I've drawn a little line. That should come in the kit that way. If it's faded and you can't see it, then the line is at 2 3/4 inches back from the leading edge. If I don't have a long straight edge, then what I'll want to do before I put glue on the root edge is I'll want to mark that 2 3/4 inch, and I'll want to cut that. And just, you can either use a piece of tape at that 2 3/4 inch line, but at some point in the center you want that mark, and then you can put your straight edge down, cut one half, and then cut the other half. You do want to cut that slot after you glue the root edges together, so that the slot does end up continuous all the way across. If you cut them and then try to glue it together, you got to make sure the slots are lined up. It's easier to cut the slot afterwards. For cutting the slot, I really like these snap blades. I get them at Ace Hardware for about $1. You can set the depth to whatever you need. And that's handy, especially when you're doing a spar slot where you only want the slot to be maybe 1/8 of an inch deep. These have set for a minute or so now, so I'm going to go ahead and press these together. I'm going to check the alignment. If you don't push them together real hard, you can still move it around a little bit. But I want the leading edge, mainly the leading edge, to be lined up really well, and then the top surface and the bottom surface to be lined up real nice. And then I'm going to press them together with a fair amount of force so that they get a good bond. And as you can see, even holding it level, it will hold pretty good at this point. If I were to try to bend it, it would go ahead and try to pull apart, and so I don't want to do that at this time. I'm going to go ahead and lay out my straight edge on here. I'll do the top side first. And also, to help hold my straight edge, I've got a couple of big T-pins, and I've drilled a 16th hole in a couple places on my straight edge for that to go. I'll line up one tip, line up the second one, and then I'll go back and check them both again, make sure they're lined up right. And then I'm going to put my T-pin in. Okay, so our spar rod is 1,000 millimeters, which is about 39.5 inches, so just a hair under 40 inches. Our wingspan on this one, 42.5 inches. And so we've got about 3 inches spare between the length of the wing and the length of the rod. So I'm going to leave about 1.5 inches on each side where I don't need to cut the spar slot. And so on my straight edge, that's going to take me from 1.5 inches on one side down to 41 inches on the other. I've got my knife set for about the depth I want. I'll start at the 1.5 inches, and I can go past a little bit. And just cut a nice little slot, like I said, about 1/8 of an inch deep down the length of the wing. Okay. Now on this wing, to get it similar to the full-size aircraft, we've actually cut a taper in the wing tip. And so that can cause it to where the slot isn't deep enough out near the tip. So I'm just going to open it up with my thumb a little bit here, and then just cut a little bit deeper on both sides to make sure I've got plenty of depth. And then I can even go in and just push the spar in place, and it just pushes right down into the slot. And just test fit it. It disappears into the foam pretty nicely. It's probably about 1/16 of an inch below the surface, and you can still see the line, but it's covered in foam. You want that foam to go all the way around the spar. You don't want it sticking out the top at all. And so I'll bend this tip so I can get that spar back out. And then we'll flip it over and we'll do the bottom side. Again, I'm going to check both ends twice. Measure twice, cut once, right? And then again, I'm going from 1.5 inches across to 40 inches. Excuse me, 41 inches, and that'll line up with the length of my spar. This one's a little bit harder to see the slot because the foam is white, but I'll go ahead and test fit. spar in the bottom. And you can see right down the wing there that it's seated in there nicely. So I'm going to pop it out. Now if you're doing a flat wing, it really doesn't matter which side you do first, top or bottom. In this case, I'm going to put a little bit of dihedral in it, and so I'm going to want to glue the bottom spar in first. I'm actually going to take a pen and mark the very end of my spar slot here. So it's about 1.5 inches. I'm just going to put a little dot of ink there, and on the far side at 41 inches. That'll help me here when I'm putting my glue in to know where to start. Clean up my workspace a little. Now I'm going to take, I've got the tip of my glue cut at just a slight angle. In this case it doesn't matter if it's cut square or at an angle. And I want that tip to actually push down into the slot just a little bit. And then I'm going to squeeze as I go. As I do that, the foam will close up back together as the tip passes through, and just a little bit of glue will squeeze back up out of that slot. That way I know that there is glue down in that slot. I'm trying not to get too much on the surface of the foam. I want most of it down in the slot. It doesn't take a lot because that slot's going to close up around it, but we want to be able to get good glue coverage on the spar itself. So I'm kind of using my left hand to spread the foam a little bit, and just light pressure squeezing the bottle to get some glue down in that slot. Okay, and I'm going to take and put the rod at my mark and just start pressing it down into the foam. This is coating the spar in glue and then also forcing glue down into the slot as you go. And this has proven to be a very strong method to glue this spar in. Okay, it's sitting nicely in there. I'm just going to take my finger and kind of rub the glue that is on the surface just kind of into the foam. And then we're going to let that sit for about 10 minutes. We want a nice good cure on that glue so that it doesn't move as we do the top of the wing. Alright, so I came back and checked my wing after the bottom spar had dried about 10 minutes, and I wasn't quite happy with how the glue was drying, so I actually let it sit for about 40 minutes, and it's set up real nice. If I pull on the joint, I can see that the glue's trying to resist, and so it's not going to try to pull out when I'm working on the top side. In this state, with the spar just on the bottom, the wing is still flexible. It takes the spars on top and bottom to really give it its rigidity. So on the next step, this is actually going to be a two-part step. What we're going to do is the spar is going to go in. I'm going to do the left-hand side first, and what I'm going to do is glue the spar in to about 1 inch from the center of the wing, from that center joint. I'm going to stop about 1 inch from there. What that's going to allow me to do is I'll let that first side set up, and again I'll let it dry for that full 40 minutes, and this left-hand half of the wing will be nice and very rigid. Once that's cured out, then I can glue in this center section and the right-hand side, and I'll actually cause that bend to be here in this center section. About that center 2 inches, we'll just have a nice gentle curve. We're not putting a lot of dihedral in it, so that curve in the center of the wing is going to be very slight. So it'll still made up the fuselage real nice. So again, I'm going to go in and I'm going to take my pen and I'm going to mark about 1.5 inches in where the end of that spar slot is on both sides here. And that just kind of gives me a reference, real small mark. Take my foam tack glue, and again I'm going to take my left hand and kind of just spread the foam apart so I can see where that slot is. And then just put just enough glue down in there, and kind of, if I push the tip into the slot, that really gets the glue into the foam down in that slot. And when that slot comes back together out in here, there's just a small, maybe a 32nd of an inch bead of glue that's getting squished back up out of the foam. Just a small amount. Most of it's down in the foam there. Oop, and I went too far. I'm going to take and just wipe this glue in the center. And in that case, what I'll do is, as I put that in, I'll come back after a while and make sure that spar is loose there in the center, that the glue doesn't set up on it. So I'm going to take the left hand side, put it at my mark, press it down into the foam, and I'll just come in and go to about 1 inch off that center line there. If I have to, I can take my knife once that glue is cured, and I can kind of cut around the spar and cut that loose inside there. I'll wipe up any extra glue that's on top real quick. And then I also want to kind of press down on the wing, make sure it's nice and flat. And then I also will just kind of sight down that leading edge like that. And just make sure that there's no bend. Right now there's a little bit of a curve down right here in the wing. And so all I did was just flex that just a little bit. The spar on bottom will stay still, but the spar on top will let that foam compress, and that's how I straighten that wing out. So now I can sight down it, and it's really true going down the wing all the way down to the center line. Carefully, I'm going to let that sit flat on my table, and then I'll come back and check on that occasionally, make sure that the glue's not set up in past here. Ideally, I would have stopped putting my glue about here. Might be a good idea to put a piece of tape there just to remind you to stop putting your glue in. And then I'll come back after 40 minutes and we'll finish the rest of the wing out. Okay, it's been another 40 minutes, and we have previously glued in the bottom spar all the way across. We've then glued in the spar on the left hand side of the wing, stopping the glue about 1 inch from the center joint. At this point, since this left hand side is cured, that part of the wing is nice and stiff and strong. The right hand side is still flexible because it just has the bottom spar in it. At this point, I'm going to pull the rod kind of up and out of the way, and I'm going to get some glue down in the rest of the spar slot. One thing to note is, although the solvent in the foam tack is pretty mild, you still want to be careful with it around paint. If you have glue on the paint and you start rubbing it around too much, you can either remove the glue or smear it. So you want to be careful how much you deal with the glue while it's wet on paint, so that it doesn't cause any issues with the paint. And so we've got the glue in there. I'm now going to spread this spar slot just a little bit and push the spar down into the foam. Okay, so now we have a flat wing. With this still wet, I'm going to hold down the center of the wing right on the center line with my right hand, and I'm going to grab the left tip with my left hand and I'm going to pull up. And what happened was the spar slid in the slot on this right hand side, allowing the left wingtip to come up. I've got my 3/4 inch spacer, because if I let go of the wing, it's slowly falling back down because that spar with the wet glue is sliding back down. So holding the center of the wing, I'm going to lift that up and I'm going to put my 3/4 inch spacer under the left hand side of the wing. Now you could go inch and a half might be kind of pushing it, but 3/4 of an inch to an inch is going to give you a slight amount of dihedral and allow just for a little bit improved flying characteristic, but still allow you to do rolls and fly inverted. Now I'm going to kind of make sure the right hand side of the wing is nice and flat, and then I'm going to take some weight and I'm going to weight down the center section so that this maintains the nice bend right on center, and then let that cure again another 40 minutes or 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have a nice dihedral in the center section of the wing. Another 45 minutes has gone by. We have glued the center portion and the right hand side of the carbon spar on top of the wing. The left hand side is has a spacer under it. I've got a 3/4 inch wide piece of tape, or a roll of tape, to act as a spacer. Anywhere from 3/4 to 1 inch is what's recommended. I've put some weights on the center of the wing to keep the spar in place while it's curing. I take the weights off now, and if we sight down the wing, you can see there's just a little bit of a dihedral. It's going to end up being about 3/8 of an inch per side, and that's going to give us some real nice flight characteristics, and it's a pretty simple way to do it. Finally, I'm going to quickly touch a little bit on setting up the wing. I've got a Spectrum DX7. You'll have to look at your radio's manual and try to figure out how you want to set up your flaps. On the DX7, what I've got is the wing type set up as flaperon. What that's going to do is use channels 2 and 7 for aileron. Now I'm not going to use the ailerons as flaps on this model, so I am going to have the flap program or the flap option inhibited. I'm just going to set up the wing as flaperon, and that'll give me a dual aileron control. And actually that would be channels 2 and 6, not 2 and 7. The flaps themselves, what I'm going to use is the P-Mix option, and I'm just going to use the gear switch. So the gear switch is typically channel 5. So I'm going to use the gear switch for one of my flap servos, and for the other one I'm going to put it in channel 7 and then use a P-Mix to mix channel 5 gear to channel 7 so that they'll both operate the same. And then you can use your reversing on either channel and your trims to get them trimmed properly and moving in the right direction. I've got my 8-channel receiver in this case. You can use a 7-channel. I've got So the aileron with an extension is plugged into the aileron channel. I've got a flap without extension plugged into the gear channel, channel 5. I've got the other aileron with extension plugged into channel 6 and the flap servo plugged into channel 7. You'll want to go ahead and bind your receiver, plug in all your servos, and set all your trims at 0 in the radio, and then turn on your receiver and let it center all the servos. Now on your gear switch, which is typically this upper left switch, you'll want to pick whichever position, whether it's flaps up or flaps down, set it in that position. And on your flap servo, you'll actually say that you want it in the flaps up position. The flap servo sits in like this. In the flaps up position, we'll want that servo horn canted back about 30 degrees, and then when you flip your switch, that will move it over into the up position. So you want to go ahead and set the servo so that in either position it's about the same angle off of the center line, and then that'll go in like that. So your servos will go, I think typically the channel 2 would go to left aileron. So that'll go there. And then the other aileron servo, and get the horns on the right way, will go there. And then, and you want to have those in the correct one, because it is good to add a little bit of aileron differential where the ailerons move up more than they move down. And so what you can do is go in and set your differential at 50%, move your aileron stick, and you'll be able to see which the servos move more in one direction to the other. You'll only want to run maybe 10 to 20% differential, but 50% will let you know which direction is which. And so in this case, you want more up than down, so you want that servo arm to travel more to the rear than to the front. And then the flaps, they're going to move about the same either direction. Set these, so this would be the flaps up case. That'll put the servo arm towards the rear a little bit, and your servos go in just like that. You'll want to go ahead and get all your arms set just right and put your screws in. That way you're not having to fiddle with trying to get the screws in after your servos have been glued in place. As far as the wiring, what I'm going to do is take my knife, and I'll set it a little bit deeper, maybe about a 1/4 inch, and I'm going to cut from the edge of this servo opening, right where the wire would come out, to kind of up into this area up here of the servo for the center. And then I'm going to cut from this corner into this slot and really all the way across from servo opening to servo opening. And then again from this corner to more up in the middle by that servo arm cut out. So your aileron servo will go in first. And I'll use hot glue on these. I'll put a dab of hot glue in the cutout for the servo arm, or for the tab. I'll put a dab in each of those, and then I'll put a little circle of glue on the bottom and then shove that down into place. Then you can take and just kind of shove your servo wire down into the cut that you made. Get it pressed down in there. And then the servo connector for the extension, that'll go in its slot. You can shove the servo wire in there, and then just press the remaining extra wire just down into the bottom of the servo cutout. The flap servo would then get glued in on top of that piece of wire, and its wire will just shove right in next to the wire for the flap servo into that same cut. And so there's one side, and then I'll do the same on the other. And that will set up your wing with the servos. For the control arms, what I'll do is just take a straight edge, run it back, and then I'll put a little mark for the tab on the servo, or on the control horn. It's got a tab like this right here, and that tab will get down into the foam. So you put a little mark there, take your knife, cut a groove in the mark, and then again I use hot glue on these. It's a little bit stiffer than using the foam tack. Put some hot glue down, shove the tab down into the foam, and have the rest of the control arm be flush on the surface. The kit also comes with some metal wire that can be cut into pieces, and then a Z-bend put on each end to link the control horn to the servo arm. You could also put a mini easy connector on one side that makes adjusting it a little bit easier. But that's pretty much the setup on the wing. And that'll get that part taken care of. Thanks for watching.